Hi, in this video we're going to show you how to start authoring UI tests. You should have already watched a previous video on how to set up your environment. So at this stage you should be able to run the UI tests. So the first thing that you'll need to do is add a new test file to the testing directory. I'm going to add a test to test the Visual Dashboard page in OnKey. I can show you that in this tab. So it's a page with some widgets and graphs. You normally land on this page, but I'd like to test that this page loads correctly and these widgets are ready. So to do that, the first thing you'll need to do is add a test file. It's a JSON file format into the work orders directory, because we're testing the work orders entity. I can add it to Git. Now, to begin writing the test file, you'll need to know what commands are supported and what the testing framework supports. So to do that, you can head over to kbraven/UI testing processes. In there's a documents folder. So if I'm on the home page, head to the documents. These are the action systems that are supported. So the most common one to use is Perform. That will contain things that you need, like navigating the browser to a page. Click is another very commonly used one. This documentation contains how to use these functions, like how to query the element either by ID or a query selector, how much of a timeout you want to give, so how long it should wait to try and perform this action, and other arguments necessary for that required function. So if you go through these, you'll be able to find the functions that you need. So for my scenario, the first thing you'll need to do is open up your JSON file object, and every testing file needs an ID. So I'm going to give mine an ID of Visual Dashboard test. Then every test needs a starting entry point. So in our case, it's main. It needs a main process step. And then the next required step is a position to start the process from, the testing process. So you add a start process step into that main process. The next thing we'll need, now I've gone ahead and authored this test ahead of time so that I can reference it. So I'll add it. What I'm going to do is add it to my screen here, and we can talk through this as I add it. So you'll see I've created this structure already. Okay, I'm missing the steps section. So each main process has process steps, and the first step is start. So let me copy the steps in. Now we're ready to start the actual testing steps with the initial start step. So the first thing you'll want to do is, I'm going to need to use the Perform action system. So as I showed you earlier, Perform contains all these actions. So this is the action system, and these are the actions it contains. So the first thing you'll need to do is to navigate somewhere, to navigate to a URL. So I'm going to choose the navigate action. So remember, it's on the Perform action system, and we're calling the action navigate. Then we need to provide some arguments to this process step. This is a convention. Most process steps will need arguments to be sent to them. So you provide it in the format of an args property with an object value. So here's the key, args, and the value is an object, a JSON object. And inside this JSON object, we can provide arguments. So for navigate, the argument is URL. So if I go back here, I can add the URL argument, which is a key value pair. The key being URL and the value being the string. The string is a variable on the system, which is the state server /dashboard /work order. So this variable comes from, if you remember the first video we did, that'll come from the server argument to the UI testing executable. So we have our server, and then we append the actual destination on that server. So once we have that step, we should at this point already be able to run our test. It should just navigate us to this URL. So I'm just going to skip my example. At this point, we should be able to run and just navigate, perform that one process step. That's very fast, no errors. We can check the results. It should be successful. It logged in. It first has to, every time we use OnKey, it has to log in using a template. But what's interesting to us is our test navigated successfully, no errors. So we can continue then. So we have one step, but obviously we want more than just that. We want to test that these Visual Dashboard components actually load and are ready. So we need to add a next step property key value there. So that is just under this in this object literal in JSON. We want to add a next step key, and this will point to the next step that we'll write out. So at the moment, obviously, we don't have this step, but this is the convention to tell your process step where to look for the next step to execute. So we still need to author that step. So to do that, we can put in another. So every step appears inside. Let me just get to the right level here. Every step appears inside an object literal. My IDE just, I need to give it a name. So the name will be this wait for idle CPU. Now it should format my code correctly. So in this case, we're using a different action system. We're using the wait action system, and we're using the idle action. I'm going to copy those two across. I'm going to copy the whole, well, let's copy these two across. Now remember, in the process, in any process system, if you don't provide a next step, the process will execute then, or will exit, sorry, at that point. So now if we look at documentation, we have this type, the action system wait and the action idle. Let's have a look what the documentation says about that. So we go to the wait system and look for idle. here it provides a description of what idle does, waits for the CPU to be idle. You can pass in an ID, a query selector ID, or a query selector itself, and a timeout. So what that does is just wait for the site to become stable and ready to be interacted with. So if you had to look at that, it's idle. While it's busy loading in that, it return false for idle. So at this point again, at every step you should be able to run the test. And it's executed successfully. It's still at this point difficult to see what's happening because it's so fast. But if we look, you'll see both of our steps have successfully passed. So the next, again, we need to tell us where we're going next. So I want to go to a step called wait for dashboard grid to be ready. So wait for the actual work orders dashboard to be ready. Now I'm going to copy this. I've explained the basic concept, so I'm going to copy this in and then explain what's happening here. So here we're using the wait action system and we're waiting for an attribute. So an attribute being on any element, you can test the attributes. So I'm thinking it's the grids attribute. If you look at this advanced grid, it has many different attributes, but one of them is status ready and data loaded true. So we can wait for these conditions to be met. So this attribute will change as the data is loading. It will change from a busy to a ready. So if I look here, yes, it's looking. We're sending the ID to do a query by the ID of the dashboard grid. We're looking at the status attribute and we're waiting for it to be ready. And we've added an additional optional timeout attribute to say that we should wait for 30 seconds for this condition to be met, the status to become ready. And if I cut that out, again we should be able to run our test. There you could see a noticeable delay. So you could actually see the dashboard appear. And again, you'll see our 3 steps have successfully passed now. If we encounter any errors, they'll show up here. I can show you that. Maybe this is a good point to show that. So I can make an obvious mistake. Maybe put an S in there, or maybe multiple S's, something that doesn't exist. Let's try again. And you'll see the timeout in action now. It will wait for the full 30 seconds. And then if an error occurs, you'll receive a screenshot along with your results file. So it'll show you where you were when the error happened, and you can inspect the results to see what error occurred. So on this step, the timeout occurred, waiting for the attribute status to be ready on dashboard grids. Now this is obviously our mistake. There is no dashboard grids. So you can inspect these errors to figure out what went wrong. So I'm just going to put the next step back in. The next step we're going to tackle is selecting the visual dashboard. Okay, this one's a bit more interesting. So we're using the perform action system. If I look at, and we're using select option. Now this action is going to perform this action here. On the select drop down, choose visual dashboard. Just to get us to the visual dashboard. So if you look, when you're authoring, you'll have to find the action that you need. So in this case, we're performing some action. So we look in the perform action system. I'm working with the select box. So select an option from a select element. So that's exactly what we want to do. You can pass an ID or a query, a timeout, and the value that you want to select. So if you look at our testing, we perform action system, action select option. The query is, I couldn't just use a simple ID because of this format of our ID on that component. But you can use the attribute syntax, and then I'm looking for the select element on that component. And then I want to set it to the visual dashboard option. So I'm not going to run it this time. I think it would be too fast. So I'm going to add these next 4 steps in a batch now. They all do a similar thing. They all check to see if each widget on the screen has an attribute of aria busy false. Let me just put my next. You see, I'm missing my next here, which would cause the process to exit without running these that I've just pasted. So I need to make sure I copy my next step, which matches that next step. At this point, I can close this and explain what's happening here. So another common action system you'll need to use is the wait, when you need to wait for something to occur. And in this case, I'm waiting for an attribute value to become a certain value, false in my case. So to show you on the browser, I need these widgets, their status to become aria busy false. So if I look at my widget, I have the visual dashboard component and I have my widget, and it has a aria busy of false. While it's busy loading, this value will be true. And that's what shows that loading indicator. So if I show you again, my query is PR widget. I'm looking for a specific one with this title. Is it aria busy false? So the difference between this and an assert action, for instance, is this will wait until this value becomes false. The assert will test immediately and would exit. So I have these 4 in place now. It's for each of the 4 different components. So types of work, assets, staff members, and status. It's checking each widget to make sure it's got an aria busy or false, at which point I can say the dashboard is loaded without any major errors. So if I run that all together now, I think it was a bit difficult to see there. Let me check. I'm just going to run that again. Just check my URL. It's correct. There we see it. And a successful result. Let me just run it again to confirm it's working correctly. Switches, loads, checks the attributes. So if we look at it all together now, you can see all of my steps have passed successfully. No errors, all looking all good. So this test is for a very basic entry point to the Visual Dashboard. This is a good starting point test. So the important thing to remember is use this documentation. Think of what you need to do. Do I need to perform some action? Do I need to perform a navigate, close, click, press a key, print a screen, switch tab, type in text is a common one? Or do I need to perform some other action? Do I need to perform a wait for some value to occur? An is ready, wait until an element exists, wait for an attribute, wait for multiple attributes to be set, wait for a style, wait for element properties, wait for text content, wait for text value, wait for a selection, and the list goes on. Or do I need to? These are a bit more advanced. We'll present a follow-up video describing some of these additional features using variables and such. So mostly for simple tests, it will be perform, wait, and assert. Remember what I said about assert is it will execute immediately. So you can look for child counts, attributes, values, style properties, element properties, tag names, text content, values. So yes, use the documentation, and then you should be well on your way to writing your first UI test. Thank you.